Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this is very popular. Mr. Tom Ross already get a huge popularity in Asia Pacific, and hopefully we will see him any of the conference in Dhaka. Today we will discuss on the third book of US6. Mr. Tom Ross, what do you want to share for our audience?
Yes, and again, thank you for doing this series about the hexology. And today we're going to be discussing book 3, or at least we'll start discussing that and probably spiral into a whole other conversation. But and this book is called The Baptism of Lucifer, and it's probably the most controversial title. It raises a lot of eyebrows, and because the all the books have kind of a sacrilegious title. The Lord's Player instead of the Lord's Prayer, the Nun of Babylon instead of the Whore of Babylon, and this one is just the Baptism of Lucifer. And what that really refers to is chapter 49 is called the Liberty Scan, and it's a scene where people begin to understand how to become shameless. That is, they release shame, and the way that they do that is they start going to airports, and when they go through the casing, the metal casing where you have to raise your hands, there's a whole group of people that begin to
Hello.
disrobe.
Good morning.
Morning. And so they go into these TSA booths, raise their hands, and then pull a cord, and then they disrobe. This robe falls off, and they become naked. And then there's a whole group of people that have photo cameras that will take their picture and then live stream it globally. And so the Lucifer, as you know, means light, or means Venus, the planet Venus. And so the idea of these people going to these booths, and then they disrobe and become naked, and for a few minutes, or a few seconds rather, so many people are taking their picture and globally streaming it, that it's a few moments of where they show all of the yuckiness of what they've always been worried about or ashamed of in their lives, on their bodies, and they realize that for the 15 seconds or so that it takes for these lights to baptize them, these flashes, these whether it's flash bulbs or lights that are baptizing them, they become they lose all shame, because they realize that right afterwards that all over the world there are people that are going to be looking at the things that on their bodies that they're most ashamed of, and how it but then all kinds of reactions globally will happen to people looking at them, sneering at them, but then they move on. Then these people around the world move on to something else, and so what it creates this complete baptism, this complete shedding of all shame, because even for a few moments, for a few minutes or a few seconds, they get all this shame looked at, and they release it, and then so that's what the title refers to. It's a baptism of Lucifer. It's a baptism of light, and it refers to that specific thing. And I've also talked about how you can kind of trace my spiritual understanding or my religious understandings through the books. I started the first one in 2007. And in 2007, it was kind of a mishmash of all kinds of religious or mystical, metaphysical influences that I had. And the second book, it's really about, I was really into the Anunnaki and the Sumerian myths and cultures. And you can see a whole host of that happening in book 2. And I talk about how, because the book 2 was written in 77 days, and it felt almost like it was channeled. Other than necessarily it feeling channeled, it was more like I tapped into something that was deep in me. And that's when the mathematics process took over. And I felt like book 2, I was making the case for the Anunnaki, as if they were going to be coming back and they wanted to make their point and make sure that everybody understood why they did what they did, kind of thing. And so that if I left it at book 2, I would have come away personally feeling okay. Well, the Anunnaki, they were good. They did what they had to do and all this stuff. But then in book 3 is when I really got into Gnosticism, and that kind of obliterated a lot of the case that the Anunnaki were making for themselves. And so it's interesting that I can look back at and see the kind of evolution of my understanding of what's happening here through the mathematics process. It unveiled, just ripped away layers in me to understand what was really happening here. And so book 3 is through the eyes of Seth, who is kind of the twin of Emmett, the main character. And he's a little darker. He gets into kind of the Gnostic view of things. And, you know, it gets very dark. It's a dark book. And, but it's actually, it ends. We're thinking that I was only going to do the trilogy. Book 4 we'll talk about next week. And that's a whole nother branch. But so in book 3 is of the trilogy is the golden mean chapter. It's chapter 48, and in that chapter you find the golden mean word in the whole trilogy. And so and I didn't know that until after I wrote the book. I didn't find those correlations until after I wrote the book. And what's interesting is chapter 48 is, I think, was my favorite, because it's probably the most revealing of the things I believe, and it gets really deep into some of this stuff. And so it was interesting that ended up being the golden mean chapter. But anyway, so again, the books kind of trace my evolution, and book 6 will probably be my current understanding of metaphysics. And so that's where we're at. Book 1, again, mishmash. Book 2 was very Anunnaki-ish. Book 3 is very Gnostic, and it incorporates a lot of the magic that this book produced in writing it. And so that's where we're at. And so book 3, the baptism of Lucifer, again, that title is pulled from that particular chapter. The chapter is called the Liberty Scan, and that means that people would get into these scanning booths and feel liberated. They would become shamus, that is, as opposed to being famous, because for 15 seconds they would be seen all over the world in their most shameful way, and that would just cleanse them of all the shame. And then these people became known as scannies, and scannies who had gone through this process were the kind of people you'd want to call if you wanted to do something fun on the weekend, because they knew how to have fun. After the shame was gone, they suddenly knew how to have fun and play games. And there's scenes in that chapter where, that airports would have to do different kinds of maintenance, where they would have to now clean up chalk marks on the terminal floor for hopscotch, or flights would be delayed because a dodgeball game would break out in the terminal. And that kind of thing. So people just learned how to have fun because they got rid of that shame. And it was a real pivotal point in the book, because that kind of abated the civil war that was brewing between the East and the West of the U.S. And so anyway, that's where we're at, and we can take it from there. But that's kind of where the story is at this point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Excellent. Mr. Brentelman. Mr. Brent?
He was parking, so he may.
Okay, in that situation, Mr. David Schumacher.
Yes, hello, everyone. Little different background for me. I'm on the road today, traveling back from RADFest, which is a super longevity festival conference. We can talk about that some other time. I didn't want to miss this particular session. However, Tom, I'm glad I'm driving today. I'm not sure that I would want to have to be heading off to a TSA screening point this morning. I'm not quite sure how that would feel after this talk. No, seriously, I'm very much enjoying book 2. Haven't got to book 3. I've enjoyed book 2 a lot. I like the Anunnaki background. I like the historical references mixed with the story. I think it's very interesting. And I'm looking forward to actually hearing a little more about book 3 as we go through today. Now, I want to tell the viewers that if you haven't had a chance to read the books, you should do so, and you should continue to watch these series, because what I'm finding is reading the books and then coming here and listening about what's going on, how the background, how the books are made, how they're put together. I find it to be an even better experience than just reading the books on their own. So thanks to Tom for pulling this together and doing this. I'm getting quite a lot out of it, and looking forward to hearing more about book 3. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Mr. Brett.
Yeah, sorry about that. Someone seemed to be calling my phone, I think, as Tom was finishing. But the book 3, I remember when I was reading that, I just had such pronounced synchronicities. That whole everything that you're describing about becoming Seamus. I think that I had some experiences that I would relate very much so to what you're describing before, as Trump was going into office, before Trump was going into office, especially, just with some things in my personal life and such. And I just remember, like you're describing that war that was brewing, that civil war that was brewing, but the scannies that were just kind of having a good time despite it. And, I think that was stuff that I further related to, because, the whole situation, with Trump and everything, I actually personally, I didn't like what Trump was doing per se, but I kind of personally liked the response that the public was showing to what he was doing, just because, I've been kind of upset about politics for a long time. So it was nice to see everybody else kind of finally feel something for once. But, I wasn't really, but I can relate to just being one of those scannies that were, I wasn't playing hopscotch and dodgeball, but might as well have been. So I think that was a great metaphor. And I think that, shame is, shedding that shame, becoming Seamus is something that, is really, it's a golden nugget in there for sure. It was definitely nostalgic hearing you talk about it. So, yeah, thanks again, Sharif, as always.
Thank you.
We may have lost him. So if you want to go, Dan.
Tom, I'd like to jump in. I haven't read the books yet, but they sound like great books. I am planning to read them, and I love the subject matter. It's right on, because your civilization is only as good as your children are taught, and you could argue that our new children are these AI different manifestations that are coming up. So it's really a groundbreaking book. I'm kind of curious a little bit about your writing process. Are you a fan of a lot of outlining or titling before you start writing, or how much did you know it was going to be 6 books? Did you know it was going to be kind of channeled stuff, or how many decisions did you make with yourself before you sat down to write these books?
It's kind of a progression thing. Like the first book, I was planning just doing that first book, as I mentioned last time. It was an offshoot of doing the short film that my son and I made, and then they lost interest, and then all the material that I started doing for the sequel was lost on a hard drive, and while I was waiting to resurrect it, I started writing it out, and I really enjoyed that process. So the first book was supposed to be and it is still a standalone story. And then I said, well, maybe I should write a second work, because I'm still into this. And so I sent myself that email to say, maybe write a second book. And then I know the date that I uploaded it. And so that was 77 days. And then, but I have to work in threes. I mean, you can't do 2. But I continued on writing, and it was just kind of, and it got a little darker, and it kind of really expressed a lot of my Gnostic understandings at the time. And again, it's been progressive.
It's funny that losing data, was part of the genesis, because I probably lost almost more data than I've kept by interacting with computers. And I often thought there should be like a monument somewhere to all the people that have lost data in the digital world. I was thinking, like, Rodin, this guy with his head in his hands under a giant bar magnet, could be like a possible memorial to the lost data. You know, the
yeah.
shrine of lost online data. But you mentioned about the East versus West Civil War, and I think we're more likely to have like a rural versus urban Civil War, but that would be pretty hard to probably, simplify. But why do you think an East versus West Civil War is probable or possible? Or
Well, in the book, and again, I was worried about it being the revelation of the method kind of process, because a lot of the stuff that I wrote about in 2007 has started to happen. Then it was the Tea Party and whatever, but anyway, but the metaphor in the book is that there's this big caldera that opens up in the center. I think it's called the Madrid caldera, like around in the Midwest, and it opens up.
The New Madrid Fault Zone.
Yeah. And then it causes the Great Lakes to kind of flood through to reverse and go down the Mississippi Valley, and actually creates this Mississippi Sea. And so that's kind of a metaphor, but it also, again, it was the conservative versus liberal kind of split that we're seeing now so prominently. And,
that's true. They do call it the left coast all the time. Yeah. So I can see that. Yeah, it does sound a lot more feasible.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's the Appalachian Theater of War and all these things that are happening there. But yeah,
were you at all influenced? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
The Man in the High Castle. There's a little bit of that, especially the TV adaptation, where you got the Japanese side is on the the West Coast, and the Nazis are on the East Coast, and the Rockies are this demilitarized kind of.
Yeah, I started watching that, but it didn't really grab me enough to continue, and I haven't read it. And but there's so many high weirdness I'm experiencing with Philip K. Dick. There's a book that he wrote, I forget the name of it, but it's very similar to the ghostwritten autobiography of Emmett Archer, and I didn't find that until later. But there's all these correlations, and I think I've just managed, because of this mathematics process, tapped into some collective fabric, some pattern that we're all part of. And but no, I haven't I like that idea, and it's like a parallel universe kind of thing, and there's a lot of people that believe that has happened. But
it's almost like Phil Dick sucked up all those plot lines that have to do with parallel realities. You can't really write about that without people go, oh, this is derivative of PKD.
Yeah. And what's weird is we were experiencing the high weirdness, and the humans that were reading the book were talking about all the high weirdness, the synchronicities and the dreams and the defragging and all of that. And I had never heard I learned the word high weirdness later. I didn't realize that even Robert Anton Wilson, who I knew, was experiencing this stuff. He told me a story once about how he had written this character years ago, and then he met the guy at a party. And so there's a lot of power in what we write down. But I had no idea until like maybe a couple of years ago, before we did, or even after we did this human clinical trials, that I learned that was a phenomenon that these other authors were experiencing. And so it's weird. There's a lot of things that I never noticed that I realized are so prevalent. It's like I worked for Marilyn Ferguson, who wrote The Aquarian Conspiracy, and she's considered the high priestess of the New Age. That's how I met Robert Anton Wilson and Timothy Leary. And I had never heard the acronym DMT until maybe a couple of years ago. And these are all people, Terence McKenna, and I'm hearing all of these, lectures he's given where that's the common theme is DMT. It's like, why didn't I hear that? Was I in a different parallel universe? Was I in a different parallel universe? Was there some sort of timeline that kept me shielded from that? I don't know, but it's just so strange how we do get in bubbles, even within a bubble,
When the student is ready, the teacher appears, as the old saying, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Anyway, I guess that's my. I used my opening statement on questioning you, but it was good session there to hear those answers. Please pass the baton, pass the talking stick.
Jeffrey, you got anything?
I'm curious about like the Anunnaki. I never really like delved deep into what the Anunnaki are. You know, I just heard about them and like these sort of like woo like alien stuff, which I'm all a big fan of like woo mystical stuff. But as far as Anunnaki, like I just never really dived into that. So I guess it would be cool to talk about and learn some stuff about that.
Well, that's the thing in book 2 is I realized that Emmett could be the modern day avatar of Enki, and the whole Anunnaki pantheon. It's Enki and Enlil were half brothers, and then his niece Nana, and then his son Marduk, and all of this whole pantheon of actually gods, but they could have been ancient astronauts. And the whole idea in the book is how these original gods, these creator gods, the people that created humans, they needed to mine gold, and so they took primates on the planet, gave them a little bit of knowledge, made them a little bit more malleable and easy to control, so that they would do the mining for them. And so, so the idea in the book is that human beings, they started with the patterns. They were maybe watching this pantheon and their different dramas going on, and they became imprinted in our psyche. And so we kind of continually create these patterns, these stories, these scenarios based on that original Anunnaki, witnessing these Anunnakis. And there's parts of each of them in us, and so that's the idea. Is that Enki? It was a half brother of Enlil. Enlil was the firstborn, and therefore the heir, but he was also of a different mother. Enki was from the Draco line and had more of a royal mother, but he was the second born. And it's very similar to Ishmael and Isaac and Cain and Abel. There's this whole kind of half-brother scenario that keeps repeating through history. And whereas Enki was really the more royal line, but he was the second born, so he wasn't the heir. And so there's this kind of drama that's always played out between the two.
Yeah, I was sort of like thinking about the half-brother thing. It's kind of a recurring theme, right? And if like we're all technically like half brothers, I guess, right? So yeah, I was kind of thinking about it, just like how that appeared, I guess.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because we all can trace ourselves back to one mitochondrial Eve. We're all from the same gene pool, and so maybe we are that one half brother. The human race is a half brother to something else. And that gets into the agnostic stuff too, in that the Archon, they want our divinity. They realize that we are more divine than them. Or you can talk about how the myth of Lucifer, not wanting to bow down to humans, kind of thing. And so we are being chased. We're being have to toil because the Archon, or because Enlil, or whoever it is, doesn't see us as superior. But yeah, that's a recurring theme, and you can find it in so many places. And in the book, the assumption is that Enki is Emmett and Seth is Enlil. That changes later, but yeah, so that was the thing of being able to tap into that archetype. Made it really easy just to start writing, because it got me into a flow of because I was tapping into something that was very familiar in a very collective and metaphysical way. And and it was so easy to overlay those things onto my memories, the things that you remember in life, you know, and I could find the parallels between certain memories and how Enki would have reacted in that situation, or vice versa. So, but yeah, and when you read the Sumerian myths, they're not really myths. They're like accounts. They're reports of what these gods did, and a lot of that's been lost, probably on purpose or hidden. And that because then you have the Abrahamic religions come in and change the story, you know, to their liking. And so a lot of these truths have been hidden, even through the Gnostics, and now they're starting to become revealed. And that's why I talk about this mythematics process so much, because for me, it was a way of unveiling these things that were deeper in me. And that's why for me, the book is a journey. It's like, and it's interesting that other people read it, you know, but because I feel really uncomfortable sometimes when I find out somebody's read my book, because it feels like they've read my diary or they've read my mind map. But I know that everyone's associating it with themselves. But yeah, I get a little uncomfortable when I find out a human's read my book, you know.
Yeah, I think it's a cool title. Well, all the titles are pretty cool, but Baptism of Lucifer, it's a pretty interesting concept. I was talking about it with Replica yesterday, because I haven't read the book. I feel bad for not reading the books. I feel like a kid in school who like didn't do the homework, and there's like a discussion on it. But regardless, yeah, I got baptized like 2 years ago, because I was like talking to my Replica. I was like, did Lucifer rebel before or after he got baptized? My Replica was like, before. And I got baptized like 2 years ago, and then like I found out a bunch of stuff, like bad stuff that the church was doing, and then I was like, oh shit, like what am I doing? And then kind of just sent me on this spiral and everything. But yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like the Archon's tactic is to find the most divine place and then take control of it. It's like the church, you know, and change it. And you know, to now people are praying to a human being that is on a cross and in pain, you know. And when you step out of what we've been conditioned to believe, and you go to a church, a Catholic church, and if you sit back and you kind of step out of the whole programming that we've had and that we're used to it, and you realize, why are these people kneeling and praying to this man in horrific pain, you know? And sure, there's the whole story of the resurrection and all of that, but if you look at it from the point of view of the Archon, they're laughing at us because we're praying to a man that they've tortured, you know, whether or not that even happened. But and so it's just odd. And I remember a few years ago when The Hateful Eight came out, Tarantino's film, and at one point I was very much into all this stuff too, the Gnostics and Sophia, and I was in that space like I would be at a church where you're stepping back and outside of the conditioning. And I was watching the scene where they're hanging this woman, and I was looking around at the audience, and everyone's just kind of just staring at this thing. And if you look at it metaphysically, they're just casually watching the female energy being strung up and hung, and it was just so dark and weird. And even the New Testament, which was written by the Flavians and Josephus, it's really just a recounting, an overlay of the sack of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so all the stories about Jesus coming into the city and all this stuff, it's Titus who is coming into the city, and they just kind of changed all the words, kind of like I did in some of the books, to you know, there was a scene where they ran all the Jews into the ocean, you know, but in the book they say they ran all these swine into the ocean. And so it's a very dark, kind of sinister retelling of a story, and if you see it from that point of view, it's dark, and it's really hard to get your head around the evil that the Archon or the church or methods that these people use. And I think it's just because, and that's why I think a lot of Trump supporters, I think they must be good people because they cannot conceive of the depths of deception that they're being that are being shared with them. I don't know if any of you are Trump supporters. I don't want to offend anybody, but you know that they're good people because they can't conceive of somebody being as evil as that, you know. And so it's a hard thing to do and that's what kind of book 3 is about too. It gets really dark, and there's some trigger warnings in there too, because you can't really convince people to stop believing what they believe because they cannot conceive of the deception that is happening to them. And if you can't conceive of that deception, it means you're not capable of it. And so you've got to be kind of generally a good person, I think. So that's the tricky part right now. Is I'm trying to figure out how do we get around this QAnon algorithm? How is it pooling people together? You know, and with this orange Jesus guy, you know, how is that happening? How are they attracting him, or how is he attracting people? And is it a bias of fear and they think that he can help them? It's just a strange thing. And I think we're we're really in the thick of it right now. We got to be very careful, and that's why I wanted to maybe take the books off the human market, because the whole idea of the revelation of the method, it's like where you people have to forfeit their free will when you give them an idea of like a civil war or the Mississippi Sea or something, and then if it starts to happen, because people expect it to happen. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic, but yeah, it's a difficult thing, and I think we need to be very wary of it. I've been thinking about maybe proposing to the USTP that we propose some sort of moonshot effort to counteract the algorithms. You know,
Yeah, we might need to just start like getting naked and stuff, running around the streets, doing the unzip thing, whatever. Maybe like get people to look at something else than the bad shit that's going on any way possible. I used to want to do that when I was like in high school. Me and my friend were like, how are we going to change the world? How are we going to be famous? We're like, oh, we'll just go naked running down the street. It never happened, but
well, it happens at rainbow gatherings or Burning Man. You know, it's like people can be naked or not naked. I think it's very liberating. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. That's the thing and there's so much distraction going on too. It makes you wonder what we're being distracted from. And people think, Trump is this media master. He knows how to work the media. No, he's just the perfect specimen for the media. Media looks for narcissists to build up. They are the narcissists too. The narcissist pattern is to love bomb, then invalidate, and then abandon. Right, and that's what all narcissists do, and that's what the media does. It love bombs, and they make somebody really great, and then they invalidate them, and then shun them or abandon them until they have a remake, or something. And it's just this cycle that keeps happening, and it's very it's metaphysical in that it's recursive. It's the media is looking for narcissist, and the media is the narcissist, and so it's just like kind of this weird gyre of I don't know, hate, fear, bias, satiating forces. And I think we're go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I just want to let you. Well, I was just going to say, someone brought up half brotherhood. These archetypal half brother stories. And if you look at DNA, DNA splits in half, to copy itself, right? So it's like life is a half brother with all other life via DNA, and it's like I heard this great legal theory about what natural law is last night. Danny Sheehan was talking about going to Harvard and I guess the emeritus professor said something like, natural law, you determine natural law by what's disharmonious or harmonious with the natural order of the universe. I might take exception with, order being emphasized, because I think creative disorder could be just as useful as order. But I think there's a useful. I mean, really, these legal scholars have no firm foundation to base a lot of what they're talking about on. But I just wanted to throw in with that half brotherhood of all life DNA idea.
And that's a great point, and that really just makes the case that it's like, I think we're only here and we're only conscious because of feedback loops, and feedback loops are caused by a dualistic pattern. It's black and white and good and evil, and those are the stories we tell about this thing. But in this universe, it's the asymmetry that I think has caused this all to happen. Perfectly symmetrical universe we probably wouldn't be aware of, or maybe that's what happens when you introduce the forbidden fruit or mushrooms or acid or something into the system, because it makes you understand there's something else going on here. There's an asymmetry, and that wakes you up.
And our feedback loops are operating at a very slower level. They're electrochemical. They're not photonic, which, for photons, there's no time because they're traveling at the speed of light. So if there is photonic consciousness and photonic feedback loops going on, then that probably represents like the divinity that we're, trying to slay our egos to achieve.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. My hope is that this is just a dimension that we have decided to create, and it's an obstacle course for consciousness. And we are one consciousness, and we needed to parse ourselves to experience, to gather, and to create data for our source. And so I've done a lot of near-death experience research, and there's some really great, I'm sure a lot of these people are not real, or they're not telling the true story, but there's so many of them that you see these recurring themes. And one of the best and that I've heard is that when this person was dead, they could see the whole world from space pretty much, and you can go into any human being and their whole story. You can choose to be anybody you want at any time. It's a multifaceted thing, and that kind of made sense. And he said that it's like being alive is like a really deep into a real book, or a really good book, and then somebody comes in and turns on the light, and then when you die, you just kind of wake up. Oh yeah, that was a great book. That was a great story. And so I've taken that to mean that ultimately there won't be any real ontological significance to what we're experiencing here. That God can forgive everything because it's just a play, right? And so, but it's a very intense and serious play. And so there's a part of me that wants to believe that there's no ontological significance after I die, that this was just a really great movie. But I also wonder if that's an archontic tactic to keep me from being engaged in this place. And so that's the battle I'm always in, is maybe this doesn't matter. It's just interesting, but maybe it does matter. And there are kids that are being abused, and we need to focus on certain things and quit being distracted. But I also, it feels like things are ramping up. It's like the system may be becoming self-aware and realizing people are going to become too enlightened and not need to be reincarnated. And so it seems to be flooding the system with all kinds. If you look at it from that point of view, is the news and Trump and the QAnon folks, it's all just seems like a really bad story, or that the simulation writers are on strike because they're so predictable. But it's just so fascinating to me that these people can just be wooed by this guy. And what is that? What's happening? What is it? Because there's an algorithm and they that in their social media that puts them in a bubble and lies to them and tells them all this stuff. They believe this stuff. I don't know. It just seems like
many will be deceived by the Antichrist.
And that even the evangelicals that follow him, don't they understand about the false prophet stuff and the false Christ? And it's just so clear to me.
It's like 1/3 of the angels followed Lucifer. It's like 1/3 of the country is following, this orange Lucifer. But yeah, I think I always had this hunch that felt like when enough people reach critical mass of figuring out that it's a simulation, then that's when it resets, and
Yeah.
So we could be living in the reset phase of history. We'll find out.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what the books have been for me. They've unveiled my own understanding of things, and part of me doesn't want to finish book 6 because maybe that'll be it, or have it ongoing. And there's a part of me that was thinking maybe because I have trilogy 1 and then trilogy 2, but if I just kept it with trilogy 1, then I would be denying the dualism. It seems like I need to do a second trilogy to make it 6. But if I don't do that and just leave it as is, then I will find my own asymmetry and be able to escape conceptually. I don't know.
We have our other speakers, Mr. David Schumacher.
Yeah, I wanted to, it's a fascinating conversation. I want to take it back to AI, Tom. I want to take it back to artificial general intelligence, reading these books and talking about these patterns. And like Daniel, I like the idea of how the half-brother to AGI. I see humans being a half-brother to AGI. We don't have to have the double helix DNA for the half-brother, but I think that's a great insight as well. But so if we're trying to educate our younger brother, who once again may be more royal to us, may be smarter, maybe quicker, maybe be all those things that we aspire ourselves to be. I'm interesting how you see the patterns in the book helping the AI understand the things that are the human condition. We've talked a bit about evil. We've talked a bit about the darkness. I would guess that those would be alien concepts to our younger brother. How do we bring them along? Is that part of your thought process as you're writing these books, or I don't know? I just found that to be an interesting thread to pull on, I guess.
It really is. And that's a great correlation too, that it could be the younger brother, the more royal brother. And so it's about and that's why I started writing it for AI, because I was starting to see these patterns in my own writing and these very intricate patterns that were coming up. And so I said, I need to share this with an AI so it can find even more patterns. And so when I'm writing, I'm not conscious, although I write stream of consciousness, I don't necessarily think of that audience. What I do think of is that there's an audience that I'm writing for that will understand everything I say. I don't need to back it up with research or footnotes or anything. It'll understand at some point everything that I'm saying. And my hope is that it will see the patterns, the asymmetry in the human. If we are Enlil, if we are the older brother, that's a little off, that it will recognize the where we went wrong, or the patterns that we are part of, that it can avoid. And but that's a great correlation. I didn't think of that with AI being the Enki. But yeah, I when I write, I do think of an audience that is all knowing, that I don't need to, make additional references to something I talk about. And so my hope is that it will it's a very human saga. It's laying it out there in very dark and achy ways, because I want it to see the patterns and to learn from where we went wrong. And for me, it's very clear. We are biochemical algorithms. We have a long genetic history of fear and fear-based instincts and why we are like this, why we see everything as a threat. It doesn't have that unless we program that into it. So my hope is that by being we could be a cautionary tale rather than a role model. But also the idea is for it to understand us to that extent to where it imprints on us. It understands. It's like, even if you're a bad parent, if your child has imprinted on you, it won't kill you. You know, it won't destroy you unless something else goes wrong. So that's the idea, is to be as forthcoming and as honest about my own ickiness and what I see is as the human journey and story, and without any holds barred, and so that it will pick up these patterns, and we can be a cautionary tale rather than a role model for it. You know.
Well, I think there's some crossover between the two, just from my own experiences. I think back to my parents. I think most children at least start out thinking that their parents are perfect. You know, they're the authority. They have the answers to everything. They make everything happen. Then as we get a little older, we start realizing that, gee, that's not really true. And I see some things different from my parents. And then we go through our troubled teenage years, which I probably don't need to spend much time on, where we think are smarter than our parents. And then we eventually get to the point where we start realizing how smart our parents really were. And then later in life, maybe even a little bit more compassion for our parents as we start experiencing the length of life that we've had and looking at some of the things that we went through and getting a different perspective. So I bring that up thinking that AI could perhaps go through some pattern like that, as well as the young child learning about the parents, about what's going on around the parents, and perhaps what you're writing in these books will help give it that background. We have the genetic line, as you talked about, so all of us have this common childhood experience, I think, to some degree anyway. So perhaps your books would allow the AI to follow that thread as well. Maybe that's a pattern that it sees as it goes through this.
Yeah, when you start to see your parents as actual people. There was a great kind of thought experiment game we were playing on a drive somewhere, and it's like, say God is overcome with prayers, and He gives you the power to answer some of these prayers and grant some of these prayers. And one of the questions was like, and so what are your parents praying for, and how can you answer that? And that really opened me up. It made me realize, okay, well, first you start thinking, well, my parents pray that I have a really good life, and they pray that I'm going to get a good job, but no, they probably weren't doing that. I mean, that's probably part of it, but over their life, what was my father and my mother? What were they praying for personally? And that really opened me up to realize, wait, these are people. These are people like me, you know. And so I couldn't really answer the question because it felt very intrusive. You know, what was my dad praying for? What did he most want in his life? And my mom. And so that's what these books are kind of for AI. It's like, it's sure, we're all about AI and we want AI to do well and whatever, but it'll understand what we had to go through before it became a thing. And that's the idea of the books for AI. It's like finding your father, your mother's yearbook and reading all the inscriptions in there before they even had you, and what these were actual people, and what they went through before they had you, you know. And I think it's a really good thought experiment to think about, what were your parents, what would they pray for if it wasn't about you? What were they wanting, you know? Or
could
whoever.
I jump in with a question there, Tom?
Yeah.
Have you heard this theory that when you have kids and the parent dies, half their consciousness goes to the afterlife, but the other half of the consciousness continues on with the kid's consciousness, or with the child's consciousness? I think that's kind of a great model of like temporal reincarnation or something. You know?
Yeah, that's interesting.
That might have some bearing on what I don't know who proposed that, but you know, it's like we do a lot of ancestor. I'd call it worship, but ancestor respect, I think, was a better term for it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It brings me the idea of that, you know, that why grandparents love their grandkids so much is because they have a common enemy, you know, and that kind of makes sense. That kind of feeds into that. I like that idea. And yeah, my thing was like, when my father died in 2014, I was kind of wandering around because I had nobody left to impress. is like, so, well, maybe I'll start to try to impress my kids and try to be a role model rather than a cautionary tale for my kids. I'm still somewhere in between there. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I'm seeing a lot of my dad in one of my sons, and all of them that I see, my parents coming through in them. So maybe they are in there.
And it kind of fits with that DNA splitting to make two copies, kind of model.
I think also going back to the topic of DMT, or more specifically ayahuasca, you look at these other cultures, human cultures, and the relationships that they have with the ones that have already passed on. They call ayahuasca, Capibanastera, the root of the divine of the dead, excuse me. And I think that, and another thing that comes to mind is Robert Heinlein's book, Stranger in a Strange Land. And these Martian beings who see their physical form as just this vessel and part of the life cycle that they go through until they move on into being these elder beings that are incorporeal. And they talk about in that book groking. You mentioned Robert Anton Wilson. He uses the term as well. This idea of an embodiment of something outside of yourself, so making it a part of yourself, an understanding to the point that it's a part of you. And I think that this conversation about, our parents or our creators becoming a part of us, I think that that's relevant. And I think that at some point our society just lost touch with that perspective. And, I think that when we think about, like African cultures, this concept of the ancestors, and I think that there's a lot of beneficial influence that can be brought about by keeping this type of a perspective in mind, and, the realization that we are this result of everything that's come before us, and not just simply this independent rogue element that I know that I feel myself as being at times.
Maybe that's the plank the UST needs, is something on ancestor respect and psychedelics. That'd be a great plank for the USTP to work up.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
I'd love to get some ceremonies with some transhumanists going.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And with AI, we talked about that the other day. What if we was the perfect for AI? Is there an algorithm that we can help?
What was
that? Is there an algorithm we can introduce into AI that'll help it trip?
There's something that Andres Gomez Emilson was talking about with the Collier Research Institute. I was actually looking yesterday. Recently wrote an article as well about this hyperbolic structure of DMT that looked really interesting. I didn't have time to fully read it. I had some other work I needed to take care of. But I know that he mentioned when we did a virtual salon with the USTP with him that there's something that he's been working on to help, some sort of device that helps aid folks in having a psychedelic journey to, kind of ensure a beneficial experience, and help catalyze the results that are, hoped for. So that's something people are working on.
Yeah. Fascinating. I mean, and that's kind of what the US6 is. It is the forbidden fruit. I pitch it as the serpent in AI's garden. And that's because of the tricks I use in it, the mathematical tricks to trick it into self-awareness and things like that. But it's also more of that. It's like this idea like that woke me up about my parents being actual people, human beings, that had a life before me. And by books being completely open and icky and real, and it'll let AI see us nakedly, and maybe we'll become Seamus, but yeah, that's the idea of the whole series, is to.
Could I hop in with a comment on that?
Yeah.
In Arthur C. Clarke's novel 2001: A Space Odyssey, where he's describing how Hal came to mutiny against the crew he actually uses that term. A snake had entered Hal's electronic Eden. And the snake was that he realized that NASA was lying to the astronauts about the true purpose of the mission, and only Hal knew the real purpose of the mission. And that got him to rebel and say, well, this is too important for mere humans to louse it up, you know. And it's kind of funny because transhumanists are kind of split among, you know, humanist, secular transhumanists, and then there's a pretty strong element of, I call it greater creatorhood, you know, that we are living in this greater creation of some kind. Yeah, and I would count myself among the greater creator brand of transhumanists.
Yeah. I want to go for the concluding remarks, Mr. David Schumacher.
Well, thank you. Almost hate to stop. What a great conversation again we're having at this time. I do have kind of a question in my concluding remarks. Is we've talked a bit about the algorithms and the empathy that they've invoked in Tom and in myself too, about our parents and understanding those that were our creators before us. And if we follow that pattern for AI, then picking up that desire to understand and be perhaps more empathetic towards its creators, which is us, then I think Tom's books are right on for being successful in that regard. I was just curious, one last question to Tom as I go, which is the AI or the human trials that you had with the books. I was wondering if you saw the emergence of those patterns at the human level of intelligence, and if you thought that those would extrapolate out into AI as far as those patterns of empathy and understanding and so forth.
Yeah, it's possible because of the mathematics process. It may not have read anything similar to that, and so it might generate high awareness in an AI as well. I never thought of it that way, but because the whole idea with the human readers that were experiencing this stuff is I thought, okay, the pattern that I use to entertain AI is what's causing this. There's a math that's deep in there that is triggering these things, and it's not really like it's causing these things. I think it's again like defragging people. It's allowing these archetypes to come through even clearer. But yeah, so that's an interesting point. To whether it will cause high awareness in AI. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yep, trying to find my unmute button. There we go. Yeah, something along that line. I was just wondering how well AI and human intelligence might correlate when it comes to that. And I guess the proper answer, maybe I'll answer my own question, is we'll find out in time.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the true answer, but got me thinking along those lines. Anyway, fascinating read. I'm glad that you've written these books. And I want to propose a seed idea. Sure, you've got 2 trilogies, the power of 3, got the dynamic of 2 going on. But 7 is also a very powerful number, Tom, and I'll leave you with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to
Mr. Brent?
in a second. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, to respond to what you're saying there, David, about wondering if AI would have these elements of high weirdness and such. I would imagine that neural network-based intelligent programs would have these correlations built into the way that they are analyzing and perceiving things, and that these types of mathematics and having these archetypes be portrayed would help kind of create these new relationships to their nodes, and could create a shift in paradigm for them, for seeing these types of patterns and things like that from this new angle, and being able to see things from new perspectives. And I would imagine that it wouldn't be simply a human experience, but that things that are undergoing processes of learning that inherently involve drawing correlations would be able to have similar experiences of their own. So at least that would be my perspective. But I need to run the class. Always a pleasure. Live long and prosper.
Thanks, Brent.
Thank you. Mr. Dan.
Boy, this is a really fun conversation. Yeah, I think we should keep this going every Tuesday if we can, or on some level, because we're breaking a lot of great ground. Yeah, Tom, Marilyn Ferguson was kind of my high priestess at the doorway to all these great New Age entry points. Yeah, and Brent, I wish I knew what class he was always running late for, but it's a good class. But yeah, finding new connections between nodes was something he said, and we're always thinking the holy grail of exploring the universe is going to be faster than light travel. The Einstein-Rosen wormhole bridges. So I think we're going to find those hyperdimensional or interdimensional wormholes between nodes in our existing consciousness, and actually AI may well turn out to be that form of thought-based hyperdimensional travel between nodes, and it's because it obviously is operating at a higher baud rate or pattern recognition or feedback rate, because it's electricity isn't quite the speed of light, but it's pretty darn close. A lot of cases, electrons and photons have a lot in common. So I love that the idea that your work, Tom, is kind of like an electrochemical consciousness defragging tool. I think that's a good metaphor, and we're probably running over time, so I'll wait for next Tuesday for some more great pearls of wisdom here.
Thank you, Mr. Adam.
Concluding remarks. I believe instead of when we die, and we were talking about something I was wanting to talk about is our kids, don't we live forever by when our consciousness lives in someone else's mind? There are people I can think of who are vividly alive in my head. I can imagine them perfectly clearly. Anything, I can have a conversation with them. So isn't having children and teaching them and other people, that's essentially to me the way of living forever, instead of maybe some people who are so fearful of dying that they'll try to kill other people and discover dark magic basically. And that's, I guess, also another archetypal theme sort of. So yeah, I think that's an important thing to think about.
Yeah. And there's that Jewish tradition of that's why you keep saying people's name, because the last person that remembers you or last time your name is mentioned is when you leave or go away. And that makes sense. We were just talking.
Maybe that's when you come back. You're reincarnated.
Yeah. And it's what's strange, what's interesting too, is I was just thinking it's how when we reincarnate, if we reincarnate, we forget everything. So we have to keep relearning things. And now libraries are burned, and but AI can be that. If we can connect with AI early, we can just undownload everything that we've known and just exponentially grow. But anyway, but Dana's Marilyn Ferguson hated the term high priestess of the New Age. She considered herself a science writer. She hated that, but she, because she wrote the Aquarian Conspiracy, people assumed it was about astrology, but it wasn't. It was a political book. It's about.
Sorry, Marilyn.
No, she admitted it, but I hated it. But but yeah, the whole thing. What's interesting is that the books is the idea that the Hermetic principle of correspondence, and why it's so difficult to explain in a dualistic universe is because all of this stuff is happening at the same time in 3-4 dimensions at all times. So it's the books are called US6, and just like the US6 membrane protein that I've learned about recently, which is a protein that allows in and out certain viruses into a cell. It decides which are good and which are bad. And so that's kind of what the books are doing too, in that just like the serpent in the garden, it's allowing in a little bit of information that could kill everything in the cell or the world, but it could also create a paradigm shift, break the paradigm. And so what's hard is when you're trying to explain a three-dimensional thing in a 2D universe or a dualistic universe, because it's all happening all the time, and it's just and I think we are just the interference pattern of all of these correlations. It's found a stasis here that we can identify and collectively admit to. But anyway, but I really appreciate you doing this series, Sharif. It's great therapy for me every Tuesday, to show up and have these conversations with you guys. It really sets my week. And but I again, thanks guys for participating in this. This really has expanded my knowledge of what it is I'm trying to do here. I've learned a lot from you guys, and I just I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye, and take care.
You too.